Welcome to Let's Therapy, where we get real and raw about your mental health, faith, and blended family. We're your hosts, counselors Scott and Vanessa Martindale. Now let's therapy.
Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Therapy. We are so excited to be with you. We are your hosts, Scott and Vanessa Martindale, counselors, married 10 years, BFFs.
Yes.
Just all around. We love working in ministry and doing therapy. It's going to be a great day.
Yes.
Today we're going to talk about enmeshment and emotional incest, which sounds really bad. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
These words are not like warm words, but I think in blended families and in relationships, we deal with this and we understand this from a perspective of, how our priorities are, what we do with our time, and how those relationships look. So let's dive into enmeshment. So in the weeks before, we've done some podcasts on this, and we've talked about just unhealthy enmeshment. We've seen how it affects blended families and it affects marriages. So Vanessa, tell us a little bit about enmeshment and kind of what is that?
Yeah. So the definition that I have that comes from the American Psychological Association of enmeshment, it's a condition in which two or more people, typically family members, are involved in each other's activities and personal relationships to an excessive degree. And so it's typically where you see, like, for instance, and we see this a lot in blended families, where you have like a mother and son relationship. Maybe the mom's, maybe the spouse passes away. So then the son gets elevated into a position where he's kind of like the caretaker and kind of like the husband, so to speak. And that's where it crosses the line of emotional incest, which is what we're also going to be speaking in today, because they both really kind of intertwine together.
Yeah. You think this term like mama's boy or daddy's girl, and but as these people become married and now we are detaching and forming our own family, we see this enmeshment when it comes to how we make decisions. Who's influencing our marriage and our family? How are we making decisions for our kids? And I've seen it when I counsel couples, and maybe the wife is saying, "Hey, I feel like his mother is right in our marriage." Like there's an enmeshment of decision making that we're not making decisions together. It's like his mother's making that. Or in blended families, we see this a little bit in co-parenting, where maybe the other co-parent spouse is influencing or enmeshing themselves into their new marriage, and making and helping influence decisions.
Yeah, and, typically enmeshment involves some type of trauma or illness in the family. So, it can be the death and loss, like we talked about that, loss, abuse, or violence that makes a person in the family cling to another excessively. It could also be like maybe someone in your family having an addiction or mental illness that makes another family member emotionally, it makes them emotionally dependent on their child. You see this a lot with chronic illnesses or disabilities. It makes the parent overprotective and intrusive over the child. And so that's kind of, the enmeshment part that you see. And then where the emotional incest comes in is where those relationships are then put into a position, again, like child moving into like a father position, is where it really gets unhealthy, and it can become really toxic.
Yeah, I think like the example that comes to my mind is, like let's say we're getting older and both of my parents have gone to heaven, but I remember when they were in their sickness stages.
Yeah.
And after my father passed away, my mother, wanted my position to be in somewhat of an authority position, and I had to make sure that they stayed in a healthy boundary, that I wasn't sacrificing my own family for that, but also staying emotionally available to work with my mother, to support her. But that had to be a healthy balance. And what we've seen is, and maybe you can experience this, is that in those situations that mother is overly dependent upon their son and like, hey, you've got to be here, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And it becomes where he has become kind of that support figure or husband figure almost to his mother.
Well, an emotional incest, you guys, this is parental relationship. So like you were just saying, emotional incest most often happens when something disrupts or damages the parental relationship. Again, like it can be a divorce, it can be loss, things like that, where you're then putting the weight of that previous person's role on this child, so to speak, and now they're stepping into a position that they weren't intended to, or that God didn't intend for them.
Well, and it makes it even worse if you go back and listen to our other podcast we just did on narcissism. Imagine a narcissistic parent who's also emotionally, there's emotional incest going on with that relationship. So it's not only can you not do anything about it, but it's your fault for not buying into it.
Right. And the parent looks to the child for emotional support. So in some cases, the parent also seeks practical support from the child. And we see this a lot in blended families and with single parents. So a divorce happens, and it's the dad, now has full custody of the daughter or the son. And so, they are then, seeking support from the child in a way. And you hear this a lot in blended families, especially in coaching, like they're my friend, like we're best friends. And it turns into that type of relationship versus a parent-child authority, type of, relationship. And so emotional incest, it's unhealthy emotional relationship between a parent and a child that blurs the boundaries. And again, it elevates that child into an adult role.
Yeah. Well, and we want to talk about the steps you can take to start this process. So first, we need to break it. We want to recognize that it's an issue. So how do you know there's an issue? And I will say that's a more difficult question than you think.
Yeah.
Because I've worked in a couple that comes to my mind is I had a couple and they were married and he had a really very emotional relationship with his mother, and he didn't really see anything wrong with that. In fact, it felt very natural for him. I think because of the trauma they experienced, they used that as coping mechanisms. But when he got remarried, his wife was saying, hey, this is an issue. Yeah. She's making decisions for me and us, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
So recognizing there's a problem. So one, opening up a line of communication with maybe your spouse and saying, hey, do we have any enmeshments here? Do we have any unhealthy relationships that you want to talk about?
Yeah. No, that's good.
And then the next thing we would do is if you do see that, again, you may not have the best of luck of saying, hey, let me go just attack this person for being in this, but we want to seek help first ourselves. So we're going to seek some treatment for ourselves to say, let's recognize this together as a couple, whether that's an unhealthy enmeshment with a parent or with a child where it's becoming emotionally distant and, emotionally too invested. So we want to seek therapy and go find a counselor. We love biblical counseling. We're a big fan of that. There are great counselors available, but go and ask for some professional help.
Yeah. And, another step is establishing healthy boundaries. Work on setting and enforcing appropriate boundaries within the relationship. And that may involve learning to say no when necessary, expressing your personal needs and desires, and respecting the autonomy and boundaries of others. And so recently we were working with a client where the mom, her son had kind of been elevated into that, role or whatever, so to speak. And the son just recently got married. So his new wife feels like that the mother-in-law is a part of their marriage, and that anytime something is wrong, the mom's calling the son, and understanding that, yes, when you have a parent that passes away, you want to be there for your parents and be able to support them. But again, you guys, establishing healthy boundaries, what is healthy and what is not. And if you are the spouse of someone that is getting pulled into an enmeshing relationship with their parent, together as a couple, sitting down and praying about and discussing what is appropriate and what is not, what is healthy and what is not, and sticking to those boundaries.
And educate yourself. We want to educate yourself on what this all looks like. I was reminded, some of our good friends wrote a book called Married into the Family by Dave and Ashley Willis, and it's available at exomarriage.com. It's a great resource for just understanding and starting to have conversations about these topics. So understanding what does unhealthy look like and what does that look like inside my marriage or inside my family. So are there things that are happening via text conversation? Are there private texts that are going through? I mean, really kind of get into the details of maybe what this looks like and maybe what unhealthy looks like.
Yeah.
And versus maybe what healthy looks like. I think a lot of people may hear this and go, well, it sounds like me, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
That's just the way our family is. Or a lot of it is cultural.
Yeah.
We see this a lot where I'm counseling a couple that comes from two different cultures.
Yeah.
And in one culture, that's considered so normal and so just day to day. But the new spouse is like, this is really weird. And I don't understand this. I don't understand why her mother is involved with every one of our decisions.
Yeah.
So understand that there's cultural differences, but we want you to educate yourself and communicate openly.
Yes. And you also want to develop a supportive network. So
Yes.
build a support network outside of these enmeshed relationships. You know, that can include friends. It can include other family members or even support groups. We talked about that with the having a narcissistic family member, spouse, child, or ex-spouse. And in these support groups or, you know, supportive friends or family, finding guidance and validation and different perspectives, because sometimes you're so enmeshed, literally, into a situation or a relationship that you kind of have blinders on, and you need an outside perspective to say, hey, I hear you saying this. Hey, I am seeing this. These are the behaviors that we're seeing. And so it's always good to have that supportive network and get that outside perspective and help that you need.
Yeah, I love that. And our best hope is that by communicating, you're bringing awareness to something that somebody may not have realized.
Yeah.
So we don't want to assume that the other people in this relationship or this, you know, whether it's enmeshment or emotional incest, they mean to do this. A lot of them, people just don't know the difference.
Yeah.
And they don't know they're doing anything wrong. And I'm just going to use a funny story here. This has, when Vanessa and I first got married, my mother was a gift giver. She loved to bring gifts.
Yes.
And her idea of gift giving was to wrap up something that was in her house and bring it to our house.
Oh, yeah.
And this is an innocent form of this, but it's still the same thing. And it was just part of her love language, saying, hey, I have this thing sitting on my counter. I'm going to wrap it up, and Vanessa's going to love it. And Vanessa didn't love it.
No.
And I didn't love
no.
it. And it was awkward at first because we were saying, hey, do we display this? We don't want to hurt her feelings.
Yeah.
But then it came a point in time where like, hey, let's have a conversation.
Yes.
Because what you're inserting in our marriage is not a healthy thing for us.
Yeah.
And so we just had a conversation and say, hey, we're not really clutter people. We don't really want this stuff in our house. We love that you're trying to do this for us. We love that you love us that way.
Yeah.
We just need to figure out a different way to do that.
Yeah.
And that was received so well. And because we weren't trying to hurt her, we were just trying to educate her. So having these open conversations of saying, hey, I don't know that you think you mean to do this, but this is what we feel, and we'd like to change that.
Yes.
So that we can have a healthier marriage. So communicating openly, I think, is a big, big step.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, guys, we are finishing up this episode, and next week we're going to dive into triangulation, which is a really cool topic to look at and dive into some different areas of.
Yes.
So hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Be blessed in all that you do.